about PCI DSS version 4. So I would recommend that people who are moving and migrating to DSS 4 do go and have a look at that, because that will save you a lot of time as we've answered many of the common questions that we receive. Next slide, please. So again, as well as updating the standard, we've been making changes to all of the supporting documentation, and that includes the self-assessment questionnaires. All of those have been updated, and they also include the new requirements. And again, those new requirements will state in red whether they are going to be whether they're going to be a best practice until the 31st of March 2025. We've also updated our self-assessment questionnaire guidelines, and this is really useful if you need to try and check to see which of the SAQs is appropriate for you. Next slide, please. As I've said, we've got a lot of information available on our website, so do visit it, do have a look around the resources. One of the things that's really, really popular amongst organizations globally is the quick reference guide. This can be downloaded from the website. It's an easy to read, easy to follow guide, really to help you in your transition through PCI DSS version 4. And there is also some good blogs and some podcasts from council staff explaining some of these changes. So again, a real mine of information available for you. Next slide, please. So really, we're talking about it now. We're near, we're middle of January. The end of March is fast approaching. The time to act is now. Please don't wait. Do start working with your QSA, because the sooner you start working with your QSA, the earlier you can start planning how you're going to do that migration and how you can ensure that you're going to continue to meet the PCI DSS and to ensure the strong security protection of your cardholder data. Back to you, Chaitra.
Thank you so much for your insights, Jeremy. So the details that you have given actually makes all the participants to be aware of the PCI DSS standard and how they can be updated with various feedbacks or reference documents that is being provided by PCI-SSE. So just to reiterate, PCI DSS documents are available on the website and anyone can refer them. And just to make sure that connect with your QSC, plan your assessments ahead so that there would not be a challenge and easily the transition to a next version can happen. So coming back to this, we have seen multiple organizations who are implementing the PCI DSS 4.0 requirements or getting validated on 4.0. So one such common questions that we ideally come across is defined approach and the customized approach. How organizations can come up with the customized approach? So Dawood, for you how do you think that organizations can come up with customized approach? Have you seen any time that, giving this flexibility from PCI DSS standard has made organizations easy to come and implement and meet the intent of the objective?
Excellent question, Chaitra. We believe that the new PCI DSS has introduced a new profound security countermeasures that should help organizations secure their environments. We at KIB, we are very fond of the customized approach. This is mainly because it has enabled us to comply with PCI DSS requirements, especially when adopting, innovative technology. A simple example, like the advanced machine learning for our fraud management solution that we felt did not fit neatly into the defined approach requirements. Systems with machine learning capabilities, they tend to require processing and storing large amount of transaction data, such as a data set that includes cardholder data, in a ways that we believe cannot be served using the defined approach. Now, as a bank, we have a robust and a comprehensive risk assessment process in place that helps us understand and manage the risks associated with the cardholder data, where we are able to comply with the PCI DSS customized approach. Therefore, we're currently at this stage, as we're speaking, we're working closely with our QSA to make sure it is acceptable and that the necessary testing procedures are appropriate to the specific implementation. Therefore, my advice is to engage with the QSA at the earliest possible, as they will be able to help out in the customized approach process. Back to you, Chaitra.
Yes, great one, Dawood. What you mentioned is one of the most important things, especially when it comes to a customized approach. QSA has to come up the validation methodology to validate the customized implementation. Not only this, as an organization who has implemented the customized approach or planning to implement the customized approach, right, should have a proper risk management practices in place, right? So, and also the documentation of the customized approach, ensuring that all the details are intact is one of the most important thing. And QSA's involvement in validating this particular implementation is one of the critical points of this customized approach. And at the end of the day, you have to meet the intent or objective of the control or a requirement, even if you're implementing either defined approach or a customized approach. So Sam, considering this particular customized approach coming into picture, what are the various other strategies that the organizations can take it up, especially when they are from e-commerce related domains or basically when they work on online payment related security aspects?
Sure. I think one of the key considerations is to make sure that when using the customized approach, not to do it mid-audit, to make sure that customized approach controls are prepared and evaluated, especially risk assessed prior to the assessment, to make sure that it's not something like dealing with a missed control, and obviously not as a compensation for lack of control. So key advice for me is really do them up front, make sure they're well understood and well assessed in terms of the targeted risk assessment.
Great. Thank you so much for your valuable input, Sam. So the next one is related with the targeted risk analysis, as Sam mentioned, right? So when we are implementing this customized approach, or one of the new methodology that has come into 4.0 practices is targeted risk analysis. So Jeremy, over to you. Why this trend of targeted risk analysis has come into picture? So we had a risk assessment also in the previous versions of PCI DSS, right? So what is this particular targeted risk analysis has come up? What are the things that organizations should ideally consider when they are implementing TRA?
No, thank you very much. Yes, one of the things that both Sam and Dawood have said there is the introduction of the new customized approach. And the customized approach is really looking at enabling an organization to show that they meet the intent of a requirement if they can't specifically meet it against the defined approach. And so to try and show that they do meet that intent, then we wanted to have a real targeted risk analysis, which is focused around that particular requirement to enable the organization to actually convince or to show to the QSA that, yes, we are taking this seriously, and yes, we are meeting the intent. So really, when an organization wishes to utilize a customized approach, then this enables the organization to confirm that the approach is going to meet that level of security as described, and that they are going to provide all of that information that allows the QSA to confirm that this has been undertaken. It also has a second use. In the requirements, there are also some requirements that allow for flexibility. And within that flexibility, the TRA, the targeted risk analysis, is used to help really define how frequently these checks and tests must be carried out. So again, they provide guidance and support to the QSA to enable them to validate that, yes, the security measures are being taken as we would expect. So it's a really powerful tool, and it is really one that organizations should be using within PCI DSS version 4.
Thank you so much for your insights, Jeremy. So this being a new one, and this particular TRA is applicable wherever we are going with a customized approach and the requirements which comes up with flexibility or periodicity, providing the organizations the flexibility to perform certain activities. So this particular one is in fact meeting one of the major goals of PCI DSS 4.0, that is flexibility to the organization, empowering the organizations to meet the intent of the control. So considering that targeted risk analysis, so Dawood, what do you see this particular one? How organization can perform the TRA, considering that there are huge scopes in the organization, considering that multiple requirements coming into picture?
Yes, Chatra, that's also another good question. So first of all, we need to, before initiating the TRA, we need to properly identify the scope of the PCI. So what we did in KIB is that we conducted a comprehensive workshop to identify the specific risks. The workshop consisted from key stakeholders like the business, the IT, and the information security team, which has helped us to pinpoint the unique risks. We then implemented appropriate controls to mitigate those identified risks that either offered equivalent or even a better protection. And then we have opted for various technologies and processes that helped us to regularly monitor and review the effectiveness of the controls to ensure that the controls do provide a continuous protection based on those identified risks. What usually auditors are expecting are basically two things, right? So, of course, the first point is having a proper documentation of the entire TRA process that provides a clear trail of how the risks were identified, assessed, and mitigated. And the second point, as Jeremy clearly mentioned, is that the entity's justification, right, of how frequently the activity must be performed and how the frequency of how this frequently addresses the entity's risks. Back to you, Chatra.
Yes. Thank you so much for highlighting two important things, Dawood. The first one is identification of the scope, right? Identifying the scope is one of the major critical point of PCI DSS validation. So whether we are running the data discovery solutions to identify or how are we managing the scope. And the next one is training the stakeholders with the right set of knowledge, what they are required to implement, and then performing the risk assessment and ensuring it is documented and the risks, whatever it is identified, are remediated and ensured that the same things are in place throughout the validation cycle is the major one. So thank you so much for your insights. So coming back to you, Sam. So again, from the TRA perspective, so what are the strategies that organizations can follow on this particular aspect?
I think the key advantages of the target risk assessment is to put everything into context of reality in terms of things being less theoretical, being able to prove that especially the controls you're putting in place are validated in a sense of the real world threats that might apply to them, and especially in terms of validating how effective they are, especially for the QSAs, but also for anyone who wants to see room for improvement or other areas that need to be enhanced. I think it gives a good platform for putting practicality and real world aspect to the controls that PCI is looking for you to meet.
Thank you so much for providing your valuable insights, Sam. So as we discussed, TRA is one of the most critical one, and performing the risk assessment on the specific PCI DSS scope and identifying the risk and remediating them on time is one of the major one. And getting that particular, remediated observations or remediated implementations by the external QSA will help your organization to achieve the security posture along with the PCI DSS validation. So going ahead with the next one is application security. So as we all know that, PCI DSS 4.0 has come up with lots of new changes. One such change is having the automated monitoring solutions for all external facing web applications. And there are also so many other new controls which are related with API security, maintaining the bespoke and custom software inventory, and also implementing payment page integrity checks for all payment pages or e-commerce platforms. So coming back to you, Jeremy, where is this trend coming from? What do you think that, maintaining this application level security is requirement is very important to the organizations? Is it just for external facing, or do you consider all applications in the organization in the scope to be considered under this particular security requirement?
No, thank you very much, Chitra. That's a really good question. The world is moving to software. The world is moving to APIs. So it is something that we have to look at and have to address, because when the world moves somewhere, unfortunately, so do the criminals. So from the council's perspective, all software that stores, processes, or transmits accounts data, well, that could impact the security of account data is in scope for PCI DSS. And the entity's assessment should include verification that this software is properly configured and securely implemented to support applicable PCI DSS requirements. And that's one of the key things, is this configuration, the implementation of it, and really, the controls, the access of it. And we're seeing a lot of attacks on business logic, including attempts to abuse or bypass application features and functionalities through the manipulation of APIs, the communication protocols, the channels, etc., etc. So really, the criminals are seeing this as a way in. And so these vulnerabilities, especially in third-party components, including the libraries, the APIs, which are embedded into the entity software, means that this whole process is open to attack, and is really giving the criminals new channels of ingress into an organization to be able to steal that cardholder data. So knowing which third-party components are used in an entity's software, monitoring the availability and the security patches to address those known vulnerabilities are critical. And certainly patching is really critical. You cannot not implement security patches, because the longer that time passes between the patch becoming released and becoming implemented, allows more time for the criminals to really be able to gain access to your system. So for all of these reasons, for all these different entities that now have some way of impacting your security, we've had to improve the level of security around applications and API.
Thank you so much for your valuable inputs, Jeremy. So adding to the same point, performing the patching or identification of the vulnerabilities is one of the most important. And also PCI DSS 4.0 specifically focuses that we have to perform the credential-based vulnerability scans as well. And coming back to third-party based applications or the frameworks or the tools that we would be using from the application perspective or from the infrastructure perspective is very important. And identifying their vulnerabilities and remediating them will also help the organizations to achieve the better security posture. So coming back to you, Mr. Dawood, this is related with, again, API security. So what do you see, or how do organizations can achieve the API and application security? And how important are these security, application level security is important to an organization?
Okay, so what we have learned based on the lessons learned and breach cases globally is that over and over again, UIs, or let's say the application itself, consumes APIs, right? And those APIs are basically weak. And we've seen that majority of the security enforcements are at the UI level. So you'll find that the API are either over-permissioned in a sense that it will return more data than they should, or they have authorization flow logic. So in KIB, what we have done is that we have adopted like agile methodology. We've shifted security to left as a strategy and adopted the OWASP API top 10. We have also promoted the end users' awareness, making them understand what are the secure coding practices and how PCI DSS expects us to handle cardholder information. There are also good solutions out there that provide a continuous assessment, like the breach attack simulation, that basically evaluates the security controls in place against emerging attacks on a regular basis. Back to you, Chitra.
Yes, thank you so much for your inputs, and Dawood. So as you mentioned, right, the first thing is agile methodology and OSAP related one coming into picture. So implementing these kind of controls in the applications would ideally make the application more secure. And the second one is related with the forensic learnings or forensic investigations, internal investigations that you can probably come up with will also help you to identify if there is any loophole in the organizations at the application level as well. And coming back to you, Sam, so where do you think that payment page integrity check is coming into picture, especially when web pages with respect to payment information or payment page related web applications, right? So why do you, or how do you think that payment page integrity checks can be implemented in the organization?
Well, I think the key thing is good governance, good hygiene, good understanding of how those pages are implemented and designed, fully understanding the capabilities of those pages and their intent. But to add to that, and obviously there are a lot of tooling and ways to automate the life cycle of these management of these pages. But the key to me is really testing and remediation on a very frequent and urgent basis, in terms of anything that's identified needs to be addressed quickly and within reasonable timeframes. So for me, the key of all of this, while there always be risks and threats identified on payment pages, the key is identifying them and remediating them in the most urgent way possible.
Great. Thank you for your valuable feedback, Asan. So as overall panel members emphasized on this application security, first thing is ensure that this particular tools, the solutions that are used in the application are always intact. Vulnerabilities are identified, remediated within a limited time rather than keeping it for a longer time, and ensuring that proper patching of the infrastructure as well as applications are done, and ensure that vulnerability scans are also carried out and perform the internal forensic investigations as and when required to be clear on the security posture of the organization. Not only this, you can also ensure that you have a 24/7 managed detection and resolution teams, MDR teams, working around, so that even if there is any critical alerts that are coming into a picture are also highlighted to the relevant stakeholders at the earliest possible time, and ensuring that if alerts are raised, they are remediated as well. So considering this, we can go ahead with the next one is related with management of application and system and service level accounts. We all know that almost all the compliance standards will speak about user-related accounts. So how do we ensure that, basically authentication of the user accounts or the management of user accounts, review of user accounts is a pretty common one. But now with respect to PCI DSS 4.0, one more major challenge that we ideally see is the management of application level and service level accounts. So Jeremy, over to you on this particular one. How do you think, or from where this particular trend of ensuring or management of application and service level accounts has come into a picture, and how critical is it for the organizations working in the payment domain?
No, absolutely. And I think when you look back into the history of PCI DSS, when we first set it up, a lot of the requirements were focused around keeping the criminals out of an organization. But we realized that, as time went on, criminals were always finding a way in through various different methods. And so we needed to start improving the permissions and the controls. And initially that was focused at the administrators. We used to find that for organizations, they would have a common administrator account with a common password. So if the criminals could find that, then they could literally go anywhere within an organization. So we set off having unique identification, unique things for the administrators. We then realized that we also needed to improve controls. So initially for, again, remote access, we started putting in multi-factor authentication. We felt that one form, just a password, wasn't strong enough. So we introduced the need for multi-factor authentication. And again, that to challenge the types of attack. Now we're seeing that the criminals are very good at phishing. They're very good at trying to obtain credentials of workers. And so we had to expand the multi-factor authentication across all users and across all access to systems and services. So that really we're trying to make it as difficult as possible for the criminals to be able to move around, even if they get into an organization. Now, we recognize also that some organizations still need to use passwords. And one of the things, again, when you look at actually, it's quite a few years since we did a big update from version 3 to version 4. And in that time, technology and password use has changed significantly. So we had to increase significantly the number of characters that were required. So if you still do have to use a password, remember PCI is a base level. So if you want to go above what PCI sets, brilliant. If you don't want to use passwords, that's fine. Just use the multi-factor authentication. If you are using passwords, then 3-word phrases are easier to remember. They're longer. The longer the password, the better. But really, it's trying to prevent the criminals from being able to find an easy way into an organization. And then when they are in, trying to prevent them from being able to get around and steal that data.
Yes, thank you so much for giving your valuable inputs, Jeremy. As you mentioned, few more changes that we ideally seeing in 4.0 is extending the multi-factor authentication to all the users in CDE, as well as the phishing related, automated solutions that we need to have, as well as the awareness that needs to be provided among the stakeholders who are in PCI DSS scope. This all will help the organizations to ensure that this organization's security posture is good enough so that even if the hacker comes into the organization, has relevant steps so that he can't reach the actual payment card information in the organization. right? And considering this, now being an implementer yourself, right? So how easy it is for the organizations to change the application and service level accounts? What are the critical steps that as an implementer you need to consider, strategies that you can come up so that the intent and the objective of this particular requirement is met?
Sure. Before I answer that, I mean, we believe that the access management issue is that the accounts are over permission, right? So this is the biggest challenge. And once you have an excessive an account, that basically means you are able to retrieve excessive data, and attackers love this. So, and we've noted that majority of the accounts do not follow the least privilege principles. And what makes it even worse is that there is no proper inventory. So we believe that adopting privilege access management, endpoint access management solution, or having a proper identity access management in place is important. Also, adopting key management solution could also render effective and secure the keys that are generated from the systems within the environment. Shifting is not that easy, I understand, but you need to assess the complexity. You need to have a firm action plan in place that would help you achieve the intended objective.
Right. Thank you so much, Dawood. As you mentioned, right, first thing is inventory of these accounts is a biggest challenge. Many of our organizations may not even know these kind of inventories of these accounts. The second thing is changing the password may not be a feasible one. At that time, we can proceed with the stringent complex passwords in these cases as well. So, right. Thank you so much for those insights. So coming back to you, Sam. So what are the other strategies that you can provide us, the participants, so that they can go and ensure that this particular control is met in a easiest way and in a good way?
Sure thing. I think the key thing here is it's a very complex problem to solve, especially if you've got a lot of legacy, a lot of accounts that aren't well managed in terms of what their intent and real access requirements are. For me, it's always about understanding what's the organizational perspective before starting on a technical change, understanding what are the real role-based access requirements, start from a almost like a use case perspective rather than digging straight into the tooling and the technology that will help support this this control area, and really focus on is there a redesign required? Is there a new understanding of access as a concept in the organization? And don't underestimate the amount of effort it could take to redesign, rebuild, and reorganize things that are basically more in line with what industry best practices are. And as Jeremy mentioned, PCI is aligning closer to what we see in the real world out there. And by doing this, it reduces the risks significantly.
Yes. Fantastic answer, Sam. So overall, just to reiterate, like how do we manage these kind of application and service level accounts is first is identification of the service level and application level accounts, prioritizing which one is critical to an organization, performing the risk assessment, and then updating the complexity of these kind of accounts. Not only this, monitoring these accounts on a regular basis, documenting the same, and creating an awareness among the stakeholders is where all this particular requirement can be easily met. And I think this is one of the wonderful strategy that the organizations can consider into. So considering the next one, I think this is the right question to Jeremy. Jeremy, you might have come across this question like thousands of times. So what is the right version for an organization if they want to choose it now, 3.1 or 4.0? I have seen in my experience, during the transitions, organizations have taken more than a year as well. So considering this particular fact and considering the complexity of the technologies and the threat landscape as well, so what is the right option for the organizations to choose now from a PCI DSS 3.1 getting expired in next 2 months?
No, you're right. This is one of the most common questions we're receiving. So given that we are in middle of January, I think you have to look at your organization along the lines of how long will it take us to undertake our annual assessment? And if you consider that actually through a normal assessment, we'll easily get that completed before the end of March, then you can undertake 321. It is still recognized, valid, and supported, and that can be your annual assessment. If you think that you're going to be close, or actually it takes a couple of months, so we might get to near the end of March, I would recommend you talk to your acquirer and work with your QSA to see if actually that's going to be acceptable to do that under 321. But I would also say, given that we've pushed out the new requirements, the move to version 4 isn't that big. So if you have done your gap analysis, if you are ready, if you're looking at version 4 thinking, let's do this, then you can do it now. I've seen a lot of organizations around the world who have successfully implemented and had validated their version 4 assessment. So it is one of time. It is that if you can get it completed and you're comfortable with doing that this year, then go for it. If you're equally comfortable, actually want to show, we do take, we really want to get this new version in place because we think it's going to be good for our organization. And by the way, it is going to be good for your organization, then migrate to version 4.
Great. Great answer, Jeremy. So at this point of time, it is always recommended to go with 4.0, considering that the detailed gap analysis can be done. Organizations can plan if there is any new technical requirements coming into picture in future as well. So considering the tight deadline that we have for 321, it is recommended to go with 4.0. However, if the still organization is more comfortable with 321, they can proceed with 321, but it is honored before 31st March 2024. So considering this, moving ahead with the next one is, so what are the 2 essential strategies that you see in the seamless transition from PCI DSS 3.1 to 4.0? So Dawood, can you provide your 2 essential strategies that the other stakeholders can also implement in their organizations?
I think before reviewing any standard, like similar to any standard release, right? The first thing we should look at is the summary of changes document. I think this is a good starting point. It helps us it gives us an insight into the level of changes made by PCI DSS, and I think they have done a great job highlighting those changes to us. So this has enabled us to make the decision, yes, that we want to continue pursuing the 4.0. Also, having a PCI DSS training is important. It's good to make sure that the key stakeholders involved in the PCI DSS implementations are well versed with the PCI standard and what is expected from them. I'll give another one if you allow me. I'll give you a third one, which is the completing the self-assessment questionnaire. I think this is also a good strategy forward.
Great. Thank you so much for your insights, Dawood. As you mentioned, first one is to refer to the summary of changes, which is available on PCI SSC website, discussing internally, performing the internal self-assessment, have a detailed discussion with your QSA, understand what are the evolving requirements, mandatory requirements, new requirements, future dated requirements as well, will help the organizations to come up and plan for the PCI DSS 4.0. So, Sam, what do you think are 2 essential strategies that organizations can consider?
I think for me, the two key ones for me, the first is, it probably sounds a little bit fundamental, but understanding your environment, understanding your services, understanding the asset inventory, and especially the interdependencies, almost going back to basics and really making sure you fully understand what is this environment you're responsible for and securing. And then on top of that, having a good risk culture within your organization really helps make sure that you've got the right decisions being made, the right support from your executive and stakeholders, but especially in terms of validating the decisions you're making in terms of, are these fit for purpose? Are they going to address the risks that you're identifying as part of your targeted risk assessments? And that all falls down on having the fundamentals of good risk culture and good risk understanding. So those 2 things for me are kind of building blocks in a sense for doing not just PCI, but just good security practice as well.
That's a fantastic answer, Sam. So as you mentioned, right, understanding our own organization is one of the most important things. So once we understand the business processes, the risk principles, risk management technologies or methodologies that we are following in the organization, defining the boundary for PCI DSS scope, understanding the relevant changes, performing the self-review, having a discussion with your QSA for the detailed gap assessment will ideally help you to achieve PCI DSS 4.0 in a right track. So, Jeremy, over to you. Like, what are the two strategies that organizations can come up with respect to the seamless transition to 4.0?
Well, hopefully you've already done them, and hopefully that you've been doing a lot of the planning, you've been doing the gap analysis, and you've also started talking to your QSAs. If you're going to have a validation, then the earlier you talk with your QSA, especially on some of these new requirements, especially if you're thinking of doing the customized approach, then this is going to really help make that a seamless transition. So we've tried to put out a lot of guidance from the council. We've tried to put out a lot of support because we really want this to be an easy move. But yes, there are some changes. Yes, we've had to react to how criminals are attacking us in this modern world. And so really it is about reading about the basics, as Sam said, getting the basics right. Really fundamental starting point is understanding what you have and where, how you use it, and then working with your internal security team and your QSA team together. That's going to give you that seamless transition.
Great. Thank you so much for that valuable inputs, Jeremy. So with my experience to add to all the points that are given by the panel members, so first and foremost thing, as we discussed, is understanding the organization's aspect. The second one is run the data discovery tool, understand what is the scope, where the card data is underlying, and then ensure that you put a boundary to that and ensure that data is within that particular boundary. Discuss with your QSC, analyze what are the changes that are required, plan for those particular changes, ensure that, the major learnings that we ideally get across, like, example, CISA top 5 learning from forensic investigations that CISA has done, like various learnings from various ways we can implement in the organization, adding to the point, like having a performing, credential-based vulnerability scans, identifying the patching, implementing those patches, getting the application level security done, or coming up with a flexibility that PCI DSS standard has given, like, customized approach, performing the TRA for the required, assets on the respective controls is somewhere we can come up with a seamless transition to PCI DSS 4.0. So going ahead with the question and answers, right? So we do have some of the questions in the Q&A, chat box. So one such question, it states, Dawood, the question is like, considering the organizations are critical and huge, like, complex environments and having the legacy infrastructure, right? So how do you think, or what are the strategies those organizations should follow so that the transition can become easier for them?
Yes, Chitra. So I'll just try to give an analogy on this. So like similar to how Rust can compromise the structural integrity of a ship, we believe outdated legacy systems can pose an increased risk to a business. This also includes like security vulnerabilities, compliance issues, and obviously operational failures. That's why organizations should work on removing legacy systems, regardless whether this is a PCI or not PCI requirement. However, I understand that this is not easy. That is why I recommend the following actions. First of all, let's have a firm date plan on when to remove them. If you cannot remove them, at least disable some of the services that you have in place. And what would be even best if you could track the end of life of those legacy systems so that whenever that end of life is approaching, you would take the right action. Now, the beauty of the new PCI DSS is to provide flexibility. And this is what we have seen, right? So this flexibility helps us to reach the intended objective and basically protect the bank's environment.
Great answer, Dawood. In fact, what you mentioned, right, maintaining, or whenever you get to know the sunset date or EOL date of any of the infrastructure that needs to be maintained. In fact, that is one of the requirement that we see in PCI DSS 4.0 as well. For all the assets in the PCI DSS scope, we can even track the EOL date and ensure that there is a plan coming up to remediate those kind of challenges that might come up in future. Thank you so much for your valuable inputs. So there's one more question. The question is something like this, Sam. So considering that various regulatory requirements are in picture, right? Either it can be from a payment domain or from a privacy domain. Along with PCI, what do you think are essential strategies that organizations can follow so that the compliance of all this regulatory and PCI is easily maintained? And how do they maintain the PCI DSS 4.0 with respect to regulatory compliance as well?
Sure, it's a great question. I think for me, the key thing is not just understanding, obviously, the PCI controls, but looking at how similar controls across other regulations or compliance standards have a lot in common. And while they might need to be represented or evidenced slightly differently, the fundamental core control objectives usually are the same. So I think it's worth, in order to avoiding audit fatigue and duplication of effort, try to unify your compliance model in terms of rationalizing and understanding common controls that can be implemented once and delivered in multiple to meet multiple compliance and regulatory standards. But on top of that, treat your compliance programs a bit like projects in terms of they are predictable, they have timelines, they are projects in a sense. They shouldn't be something that catches you by surprise. So if you think about it as a set of projects that align to one program that is continuous and has common requirements, I think then it's a different way to look at things in terms of unification and continuous compliance as something that isn't just once a year, but it's forever. And obviously, cross-jurisdiction, global organizations are going to need to consider local regulations as well as the standards that their customers and stakeholders expect. So it makes a lot of sense to look at the common control frameworks that apply to you.
Great answer, Sam. In fact, you have highlighted something called unified compliance as well, right? That makes major compliance standards to come into one track very easily. Performing, if you have an idea about what are the requirements for various other compliances, probably combining them will also give you a better posture, and it is easy to perform the assessments on a proper cycle. And coming up with one particular dashboard to maintain the compliance of various regulatory or privacy or from an infosec will actually help the organizations to plan as individual projects, and also unified compliance will actually make the works, make the things much easier, right? Great, thank you. So there is one more question, Jeremy, this is to you. How do we ideally handle customized approach? Can we implement compensatory control with customized approach? Is that okay, or it has to be two separate one?
So I think a few things, just a couple of points to clarify on the customized approach. The customized approach is only available to an organization that is having a full validation by a QSA. It's not available if you are undertaking a self-assessment questionnaire. So really, we're back to the compensating controls being something that allow an organization to use if there's a legitimate business reason why they couldn't meet the requirement in the first place. So essentially, all of the requirements are available for a compensating controls. There are some specific requirements that are not available under the customized approach. So really, it's back to this planning and working with your assessor or working through your organization to understand, do we meet the defined approach as it is, or is the technology or the process that we're using means that actually we can't do this? And is that a legitimate business reason we can use a compensating control? Or do we see this as actually just the way this process works, and therefore we're going to use a customized approach to use that as our way of showing that we meet the intent of the requirement for now and going forward? Again, compensating controls are seen as more short-term whilst you're adjusting things within your organization. Customized approach is something that forever, this new process or this particular way you're doing business means that you aren't going to meet the defined approach, and the customized approach allows you to meet that requirement through the alternative customized way. So really, it's working with internally within your organization to understand the process, It's working with your QSA if you're using one to ensure that you're planned. It's what Sam said, you can't do a customized approach halfway through the assessment. You've got to do it from the start. A compensating control could be something that could be addressed mid assessment if something strange pops up. So yeah, you can use them both, but understand how they work and which is going to be the right one for you.
Great answer, Jeremy. Thank you so much for highlighting those, compensatory control and the customized approach, and our organizations can use both of them in order to meet the intent of the requirement. So there is one more question here. It says that how frequently we can perform the API pen test. So answering this particular question from an application level pen test, it's an annual activity. However, if there is any changes in the security level, or if you're making any changes from an application level, as and when that particular changes happens, we have to perform the penetration test. It can be either from the application level or even from the infrastructure aspect as well. So I hope I've answered your question. So considering that there are a few more questions that we can see in the Q&A section, we would be reaching out to you over email individually, and we would be answering all the questions. Considering that we have reached the end of this particular webinar, so as we conclude today's webinar on winning strategies for PCI DSS 4.0, I want to express my sincere gratitude for all the insightful sessions to all the panel members, Sam, Jeremy, and Dawood. You have been very great, and your valuable inputs will ensure the various organizations implementing the PCI DSS 4.0 to have a seamless transition. Thank you so much once again to all the participants who have given your valuable time to join this session and making this particular session a grateful one. Thank you and stay vigilant. Have a nice time.